Well, I'm hoping.
Thanks for coming. This show is kind of a reflection on how I've sort of composed a life and a body of work by making sure that whatever I do as an artist or as a designer is something that I've put a little research into and had my own agenda always at the fore, whether it be fine artwork. Was there kind of an echo or something? Or again, is it my ears?
You're fine.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you do? Whether it's some of my fine artwork or some of my art commissions or whether it's design endeavor, which I really see as one thing, but there's always sort of an underpinning and my own agenda running for that. And so what I'm going to show you is a sampling of several bodies of work that sort of go into some of the most basic things you need to know, regardless if you are doing applied design work or commission work or not. And so I call the lecture Think About What You Think About. And I'll talk about several kind of evolutions of work, and I'll also try to give you a bit of insight into what I do think about, specifically if I'm working on color palettes for architects or buildings, if I'm working on an installation, like what is the intellectual component that would go with that? And so, although color in particular and typography can be very dazzling and seductive, there's always my own agenda to do the proper research and to carry that as a conscious being into all the work, whether it's obvious, whether it's commissioned, or whether it's anybody's even aware of that. It is something that I felt strongly about. And I could say that particularly my own research in color and symbology and mythology goes back to the late 70s, where I was so aware that I was a big dreamer. And so I started documenting my dreams and then trying to do my own research of what the symbology was, both for color but also for form. And then I lucked into being introduced to a Jungian trained psychologist. And although I never went through Jungian analysis, Edith Sewell was extremely pivotal in my own sort of self-education, being able to start down a path of doing the research to understand if there is such a thing as universal color, meaning what certain symbols and how certain myth is carried on, really since the beginning of time of the written and verbal expression in the human being. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Joe, for inviting me and being so avant in tracking me down and finding a way to get a budget. And I know we planned this, it's going on probably a year or something. I think there were a couple of go-arounds of you saying, what, you charge that? Okay, well, let me get back to you. And then we had a little negotiation, and I'm really happy to be here to give this talk. And I don't think I've ever been to San Jose, so looking forward to seeing the nightlife here. And thank you, Cheng, for rescuing me at the airport and dealing with the plight of a Southwest Airlines flyer. Without further ado, why don't we candlelight and how do you know if your next act is the right one or the wrong one? Consider the face of the poorest and most vulnerable human being that you have ever chanced upon, and ask yourself if the act that you contemplate will be of benefit to that person. If it will be, it's the right thing to do. If not, rethink it. Mahatma Gandhi. Turn the lights off now. And the jazz going. So I'm going to do my best to, where possible, to break down some ways that I think about things, and also sort of a little insight into kind of a dual world that I live in, which is being a naturalist and being very interested in nature, and being a gardener, and being very attracted. As a matter of fact, I moved from New York to Los Angeles because I discovered the desert, and I found that that was a piece of the earth that I actually felt grounded in, and therefore left New York. At the same time, dealing with typography, which is both abstract and often literal, and to think how all of this, the same thinking can go from physical to virtual. Computer's got jet lag.
made in space.
Okay, so these folks are going to be kind of our little introducers, our little hosts periodically to talk about some of the real kind of finite little detail things that I'm interested in. So now we've gone from the moon to Los Angeles in record time, and by the way, that is a mind-boggling application for the iPhone, which is called moon phases, or phases of the moon, in which any day you can put your location and then you can see where we are with the moon and their actual shots that are taken and uploaded. And the quality of that is awesome. I'm always blown away by things like that. That little pond and a big moon. So a little detail about typography and some of the ways that I see it, and I'm going to show how I express these kinds of ideas in typography, since I know you all like typography. This is a client that's Austrian-based, Co-op Himmelblau, cooperative Himmelblau. Himmel means sky, Blau means blue, but the word in German for building is Bau. So the identity is based on the little gimmick, the little trick, tongue-in-cheek of the L raising up, so it reads heavenly building or sky blue was the kind of fun thing about this identity. And I did this 20 years ago, and then last year we upgraded their identity and did new color palette and other materials for them. There they are. So, typography as objects in space. I see typography, like everything else, as an object in space. I see typography as having a time element and also defining space. So an identity based on articulating space using graphic means, the original identity for Southern California Institute of Architecture. And then the current identity. Intro to their website. We're not using this. This was quite a few years ago, but the website is still something that they've retained the interface for. One thing becomes another, transmedia design. So this is a sampling of projects in transmedia design. And I started calling the work we did transmedia design about 15 or so years ago. And the idea is that any project can start with a good idea, and then it should be strong and able and anticipatory of crossing platforms. If you're hired to do a website, try to think about designing something which, after they load the website, they realize they need a stationary system. Or they come to you and they want a brand identity, then you have to think about how it appears and how it functions as a digital object. So these are highlighted projects in transmedia design. This is a 1,400-acre park in Irvine, California. I was hired first as a colorist for the park, as an elaborate color palette based on the original flora and fauna of the 2,800 acres that was the former El Toro military base, which got decommissioned, and then the city voted it to become a park, which is pretty amazing that this happened. We've just implemented the first 250 acres of our color palette, the brand identity, and the signage wayfinder for the park. So, sampling of the color palette. Logo. I got a lot of emails when the park opened from other designers saying, how did I get away with murder, that I could use the main identity of the logo, the G, in kind of a warm yellow against an orange background. But I think that the city manager was just so stressed over, other things that it just slipped through. And we've been really lucky to get a pretty extraordinary and unusual color palette through the Urban Corporation. And these are proposed future applications. These are integral color cast concrete letterforms on the former runway, which is being converted into a timeline of the history of aviation. And conversely, this is an animation we did to propose this aspect of the application of the identity. So this is what it would look like. It has this famous balloon ride, big orange balloon, and so I wanted the runway to also have a light if you weren't also on foot, but that if you were up in the air, so you could actually see the word park on the runway from the air. And the Max Center has nothing to do with the computer. It has to do with the Museum of Applied Kunst, which is an Austrian Viennese big museum for art and architecture that actually bought and finished and upgraded the Schindler House, which is one of the most extraordinary little residences in West Hollywood. Schindler was one of the two most famous Austrian architects practicing, along with the Richard Neutra in Los Angeles in the early part of the last century. And so the Mac Center, which is in West Hollywood, is the Schindler's own house, and they hold small exhibitions and symposiums in art and architecture. And we did this identity going on about 20 years ago. I'm just going to show a sampling of why I call the whole identity typography as architecture. And their residency program called UPMAC, Urban Future Initiative, which is people that come apply for the residency from all over the world to work on studies and proposals for urban planning. Another famous favorite firm that I've worked with over 25 years is Royal Architects, and you'll see a lot of their buildings in this presentation with color and materials palettes. Again, type as object. is a mid-century modern motel, spa motel, located in Desert Hot Springs. It's owned by my partner, Michael Rotondi, and I. We bought it 15 years ago after having been guests at Miracle Manor for 15 years before the prior owner got cancer and passed away. And this is not only the biggest Transmedia project, but I call it, it's really a lifestyle project. And what's a really beautiful thing for me is that it's really something that's designed in real time because it's my own motel. We did the architectural renovation. We designed unique pieces of furniture. We did the website. We have maintained the website. We do all the print materials, but I've also been working with body therapists to develop certain unique treatments that you can get at our motel. We're also a bed and breakfast. So really from what people eat to the water that we draw out of the aquifer at 150 degrees into our pools, all of this is kind of in my control, and it's kind of an evolving organic project, but something that's really interesting when, as you know, it's great to be your own client because you don't get a lot of guff. However, being your own client means you're constantly losing money because you can never stop when you come up with a good idea and want to see it implemented. So the only philosophy we had for Miracle Manor when we bought it was that whatever we did had to be transparent to the experience. So it's a holistic experience. We didn't put a lot of baggage in the rooms. There's no art on the walls. It is colorful. It was originally all the colored sand. Now we've started adding color into the rooms. But it really wanted to be a place where you could just come and relax, and that the color in the rooms, just the 6-room motel, by the way, the color in the rooms was totally dependent on the condition, the time of the day, and the quality of the light. So you could just stay in the room in organic bedding and very central experience. Every room has a great view of the desert. But that what you would experience is being in the desert as opposed to being someplace else out in the world or in some other motel where you didn't have a view and you didn't have a real direct experience of the natural environment. We have a sort of Zen rock garden in the middle of our courtyard. If you want to check out the site, it's miraclemanor.com. We do have a special student rate, and it's higher than what you just saw. This is kind of an old web grad. A space that has limits but no boundaries. A space that gives equal status to matter and light. Now to color and materials palettes. I've tried to highlight this part of the talk and show some of the, probably the deepest and most rewarding of the color palettes, where you have strong cultures and, if you will, cosmologies to dive into and bring to bear on the building and the built environment. And so, This is a building, Prairie View School of Art and Architecture. It's outside of Houston, and it's Roto Architects. And this, because it's an art and architecture school, I just chose a very simple primary color palette that runs throughout. This is a new neighborhood city hall. It's in the valley outside of Los Angeles. And Madame Tussauds on Hollywood Boulevard, right next to the Chinese Theater. It was contexted by the Chinese Theater, so the zinc was chosen for that special color to be in reverence to the Chinese theater, very special tower. Now, this is a big one. This is probably still the richest opportunity I had to research color, mythology, symbology, and it's for the Lakota Sioux, and it's Roto Architects, and it's the oldest accredited Native American school in North America. They have a unique color palette, and also a very interesting numerology, numerological culture. Everything's in fours, and a lot of this tradition and their cosmology was learned by literally sitting at the foot of the elders and listening to stories, and then trying to feed this back and implement it into the building in a very straightforward and simple way. But it's very inspirational to work on it, and there's a wealth of information that couldn't ever be put into the building. Another very rich project in Nagasaki Harbor. It's a warehouse built by and for Mitsubishi. Built all with shipbuilding technology, and Roto Architects again. It was just meant to be a warehouse, but Nagasaki Harbor, where I visited, I always visit the site no matter where the project is. And Nagasaki is shockingly beautiful and tropical. It's as tropical as any Tahiti or any of the Hawaiian islands. It was very surprising to me that they get monsoon, and if you look in the harbor, first of all, the harbor since World War II, and since the amazing amount of industry that's there, predominantly shipbuilding technology and Mitsubishi, the citizens of Nagasaki have lost the majority of their harbor to landfill. And so Roto Architects took a certain amount of the budget to actually not only make it a warehouse, but to sell the idea and implement a dry roof garden where the citizens could still come, and it became a public space instead of just a huge warehouse. It also has a 4-story observatory. You'll see that's called Osphero, and you cannot miss it. But it was kind of a wonderful experience to research a little bit about Japanese symbology and to use that in the coloring of the building. This is the little tanker, the barge bringing the four-story Ospiro Observatory to drop onto the top of the building. There's a big scene in Nagasaki Harbor, like, what is that? The architects got in a lot of trouble. The governor of Nagasaki called Roto Architects and said they had to immediately get on a plane and come to a press conference to help him explain what the hell this orange sphere was in the middle of the harbor. So Michael Rotondi called me on his way to the airport and just said, I'm in a big jam. You have to quickly tell me why, tell me about the color palette again. So I just said, well, orange is for an orange. And he's like, they're not going to go for that. So he focused on that. So I said, yeah, it's for the rising sun. So he flew to Japan and got in a press conference with a couple thousand reporters and the governor and everybody was, actually there was a lot of negativity around it because it was so striking in the harbor and nobody knew what the hell it was. So they asked him what's with the Ospiro and he said orange, and he tried to see if they had any humor, and he said orange for orange, and there was like frowns. And he said orange for rising sun, and then 2,000 people kind of simultaneously went, So that made this project fly, and so this is on the roof. Children come during the week. It's a great place to hang out. The green is colored for the mountain, but actually this photo doesn't really reflect that the mountains behind are huge mountains and are blindingly green. So from this view, the building merges with the natural environment. And to be politically correct, I used Mitsubishi's blue, and they love that. But it also is one of my favorite blues, which is kind of a periwinkle color, luckily. So there's this going on. Right. And the other side of the building is made with Teflon material, so it's got coined the lantern in the harbor. It's a kind of elaborate remodel in addition to a classical building in the railroad yards in downtown Los Angeles. Regis House, again, Roto Architects. And this, I found lichen on the property, and I decided to color the massing based on a lichen palette. There's the rooftop edition. Here's what I found on the property. There's an application of it. Sitting on the couch looking up at the lichen palette. Then the only arts colony in all of California where you could go stay for up to 3 months as an artist, or a musician, or a writer, because there were 6 cabins for $5 a day. And the one artist cabin, an artist came with an entire body of work on his way to have a retrospective exhibition. And Northern Mountain was built at the turn of the last century, and it's off the grid. So this artist didn't know about propane. And there's a propane stove, and everything is propane. And so he had a propane lantern, and when the sun set, he turned on the lantern and then went to look for a match. And when he came back with a match, he literally exploded and burnt this building. building to the ground. And so Roto Architects, with their interns, did a design build for the very modest insurance money. And so I based this color palette of the new building on the myth of the Phoenix. Then I found some of my source material were little twigs and pieces of burnt material, natural material on the property left from the fire. And so a lot of they're called bundle beams, were colored based on the actual material I found on the property. And finally, my own studio on Broadway in downtown Los Angeles. This is our old website. Actually, it may be still functional, but we, of course, had to do a much simpler site. So I think we have two sites. So it's 6,500 square feet. It has almost 365 degrees of light and views of downtown Los Angeles. And so rather than divvy up the space, we devised with Roto Architects a track system and sliding panels that were in various materials. And I got a grant from Hewlett-Packard in photography and had this giant printer, so I started testing different materials for them. So the space can be either wide open by pushing all the panels together or spreading them out or kind of modulating space as we need it.